welcome to my 4th episode. I'm fine on the Proxxon FF230 teeny tiny little mill. In the first episode, we looked at the machine table. In the second episode, we looked at the Z-axis. And in the third episode, we looked at the electromechanicals. Now, in this episode, we're going to turn our attentions to accessories to go along with this teeny tiny mill. Now, I just don't have the time to cover all sorts of random machinist metalworking type of accessories or measuring sorts of implements that you might find useful. But what we will have time to cover is the Proxxon ecosystem. Well, that would be all the accessories on the web page that Proxxon has to go along with this machine, as well as a handful of other accessories which I find are either very useful or perhaps maybe better options than the Proxxon accessories. Now, let's start from left and go to right and see what the accessories we're going to cover are. First of all, we have setup supplies. We got the Proxxon parallel set here. We got the Proxxon V blocks. And then some non-Proxxon items. We got some setup blocks and some very small machinist's parallels, which are really, really handy. After that, we'll move to clamping options. This here is a couple different Proxxon step clamps they have available. This is not Proxxon. This is Tico brand toe clamps. Then we have a couple machine vices here. These are not Proxxon, but I do believe that they share a heritage with the Proxxon in that they come from India. Well, some machinist shop there. Here is another machine vise that I really quite like. This is from Taiwan. I'll take a look at that one. And then over here we have all sorts of equipment that might be compatible with the lathe system. I still plan on buying that. I haven't got around to it. I'm just too busy. I don't have the time. But I got some equipment, so when I do get the lathe, I'm set up. And a lot of this equipment is quite well usable with the mini mill as well. Here's Proxxon's rotary table. Here's their dividing attachment, a 4-jaw adjustable chuck, as well as an ER collet system. And then to finish it up, we will look at some other ancillary equipment that you'd need, like here's a Proxxon drill chuck that would fit into this machine. It's somewhat limited for options for drill chucks, and well, this is pretty much it for the machine. We'll look at a fly cutter, a slitting saw, a handful of dovetail adapters. What these here are going to allow us is to mount a dovetail test indicator onto the machine to do all sorts of useful things. What else do we? Oh, we got this center finder, edge finder, and a center finder. Proxxon did sell a edge finder. However, I think this one is much nicer because it finds centers of holes as well. It's a Starrett model here. And then lastly, what else do I have? Oh, I got these little wing screws, which are really handy. And I'll take a look at those because they're much, much better than having to use Allen keys to tighten up and loosen up the X and Y axis. Anyways, let's get at it. Take a look at Proxxon's parallel set. This set is model 24266. This label's a little bit worn out, but I'm pretty certain when I got it, there was a label that said made in India. A lot of Proxxon accessories are made in India, and indeed, you can find parallel sets on eBay and Amazon and other locations online that are rather similar to these. The main difference is that these Proxxon ones, they are a little bit shorter than the ones that you typically find that are 6 inches in length, and these are 4 inches in length also. These are metric, which is a little bit more challenging to find. Even though they're metric, I don't find that they're measured very well. Let's take, for example, here is a 20 millimeter parallel. And if we measure this, let's see, it comes out a little bit bigger than 20 millimeters, about 20.1 or so. It's not the calipers. Here's a gauge block just to show you for posterity. Yeah. So anyways, these gauge blocks are, they're not exactly the nominal value, but what is important is that they are parallel and they are available in sets. And with sets of these, it's possible to set them up on your machine and use a clamp, let's say, and you can put your part on it like that and clamp it down and maybe drill through without damaging the table or something like that. Also, one thing I use these parallels for quite a bit is for setting up, well, setting up as a reference face if I want to get a vise nice and perpendicular to the table. I can do is I can pinch in a larger parallel like that, and I can grab a vise and slide it up against there, and it trams the vise reasonably well. Often, I usually check it with a dial indicator, a test indicator, just to make sure that it's accurate. But usually, it gets it within a couple hundredths of a millimeter. The working faces of parallels are the top and the bottom. These are supposedly ground in pairs, and they're accurate to like 2/1000 of a millimeter, or something pretty ridiculous like that. However, I often find it quite useful to use these parallels laying down flat rather than in their proper orientation. So I thought I'd just give a quick look here at whether they are actually parallel on these ground surfaces. I imagine that they should be, but let's just find out for the heck of it. I got it lined up there at 0. I'm going to put a little bit of pressure down there with my finger and just see if, yeah, pretty close. I'd say there's not a lot of deviation from 0. This is 1/100th of a millimeter. Now let's try from one parallel to the next. Yeah, not too bad. So in a pinch, even though they are not specifically designed to be used in that orientation, in a pinch, first for hobby machining, I think it's quite adequate that you could use these laying down flat. These Proxxon parallels are quite useful for a lot of general setup, but typically for parallels, what they're going to be used for is in a milling vise. And these Proxxon parallels, despite being a little bit sub-sized compared to usual ones, which are 6 inches in length, they are still way too big for vices that you would use with this machine. What I have found to be really quite good, and I quite like them, are these little tiny parallels that come from Sherline. They don't come in this nice plastic case, unfortunately. That's some piece of junk I had around. Now, these little parallels are in quite a number of different sizes, and what they allow you to do is, well, you can position them in a vise like so, and you can get your part in the vise in a manner that just the working surface is protruding from the vise just a little bit, and the vise is really holding on to the part very well. Yeah, these Sherline parallels are something which is pretty, I consider these to be next to essential. Their overall length, what is the overall length of these? They are about 64 millimeters. Despite the label on the box, these here are not by Proxxon. Instead, these are Sir John Stevenson setup blocks, metric setup blocks that come from Arc Euro Trade out of England. Now, unfortunately, Arc Euro Trade just went out of business this year, so finding these on the internet might be a little bit challenging. However, if you use the Googletron, they are still available, at least in one place that I could find. Now, these here are miniature setup blocks. They are metric equivalent of 1, 2, 3 blocks. 1, 2, 3 blocks, that's 1 inch by 2 inches by 3 inches, which is actually substantially larger than the largest of these metric blocks. These metric blocks were designed for using with smaller machines, and they are sized, well, in my opinion, quite appropriately. We have a pair here of these here are 10 by 20 by 40 blocks. Then there's a pair of 15 by 30 by 60 blocks. And then lastly, we got 20 by 40 by 80. And you see these larger blocks really are, well, they're pretty ideally sized for, on the large side, size for this table. And a 1, 2, 3 block, well, it would be useful if that's all you can get some. But smaller ones definitely are a little bit more size appropriate. Now, these blocks here are lovely. They have, some holes are threaded for M6 bolts or M8 for the larger blocks. Some holes are clearance, so you can fix them together into all sorts of different manners, however you like. And just in general, they are useful for like aligning parts on the machine, lifting them up and orienting them properly. Now, unlike the Proxxon parallels, which I was using for a long time beforehand, unlike those ones, these ones here actually are quite accurate to size. Let's see here if I can get that on the video. Yeah, look at that. Exactly on the money at 40. On that dimension. I've checked all of the blocks and they're all super hyper accurate. 20 and 10 millimeters. Yeah, these ArcEurotrade blocks or Stevenson blocks, they are really great. If you can get a hold of them, get them. And here's the Proxxon 24262 Precision Prism Zwei Stuk, made in India. A little bit worn out, but that's what it says. This here are the Proxxon V blocks. You can find V blocks from India on eBay, and you might be able to find ones of these size and get a good deal on them, but generally the ones that are available are considerably larger. These ones here are, well, they're more appropriately sized for this small table. Now, V blocks have all sorts of uses. For instance, you might use them for clamping down a cylindrical object, and it comes with these slide-on clamps that can hold it into place. Maybe you'd use it with a surface plate and a test indicator, and you'd want to see whether a rod is bent out of shape or not. What I've been using them for largely is for holding parts at a 45-degree angle. For instance, here is a little video from some time ago of holding a rather large block of aluminum for milling at a precise 45-degree angle. Yeah, I've used these a handful of times. They're quite, I think they're a good investment. Next up is the Proxxon 24257 Stufenspanspritzen G-Thrust. I'm not sure I got the pronunciation quite right, but I don't know. I think it's like IKEA names. It makes me chuckle. Made in India once again. Now these here are step clamps. This here is the large set, and Proxxon does also have a smaller set available. Now these ones, I'm not sure where they are made because I got them with the Rotary table. They were kitted in there and they were just in a little plastic bag. But you can buy these from Proxxon directly in a nice fitted wooden box. And I suspect that they are from Germany because it's a different sort of metallurgy. These here are hardened steel, probably mild steel and case hardened. Where the smaller models, in contrast, they are sintered metallurgy. So I'm not sure they're quite as hard and as tough as the Indian ones, but they're very nicely finished. They're really perfect. Now, in contrast, these Indian ones, they are functional. However, I find that their fit and finish, once again, anything from India leaves something to be desired. Not sure whether the camera's quite picking it up there, but you notice that this one here on the right, the steps are all nice and even and fairly parallel with the base of the block, of the triangular block. But this one here, the steps are way off. I'd say by, what is that, like 2-3 degrees? That's horrible. Terrible quality control. Anyways, they are nonetheless quite heavy duty, and I've never actually had a problem with them. These Indian ones, the larger models, they come with this rather nice post and T-nuts. T-nuts are really handy for mounting anything to the table. Now, in contrast, the smaller ones don't come with T-nuts. Instead, they come with little square nuts that more or less do an adequate job. Anyways, these here are fantastic for mounting anything to the table, all sorts of stuff to your imagination. You could even, I suppose, in a pinch, they're not ideal, but in a pinch you could use them for mounting a machinist's vise to the table like that. Oh, of course, you need another one on that side. Yeah, these here are, well, they're a must-have, and I would recommend getting the larger set for this mill. This is appropriately sized. On Fleabay, you can find these in all sorts of different dimensions, so I'm not sure whether it would be necessary to buy the Proxxon ones, but if you can find ones that are about 40 millimeters in height, that would be quite appropriate for this little tiny milling machine. Otherwise, step clamps, you need them. Mount stuff to the table. Proxxon on the label, not Proxxon inside. Inside are some other clamping accessories, including T-nuts. I have a total of 8 T-nuts in here, and I machine these myself. You can't buy T-nuts of this size that at least I'm not aware of on the internet. So yeah, this is a great project to get a little bit of practice and a feel for the machine and how it works with steel. These are made out of stainless steel. T-nuts, you need these for clamping things down onto the machine table. So you need more of these, the better. And these ones here that you can machine yourself, you can get the size just right so that they fit into these slots really, really cleanly. Proxxon does have a few T-nuts available with their accessories. You can't buy the T-nuts by themselves, it seems. However, Proxxon's T-nuts really fit into these slots really loosey-goosey, and they're functional, but it's just nice to have some nice equipment. Now, in addition to T-nuts in here, I got edge clamps or toe clamps. These here are clamps that are made by Tico out of the United States. These clamps are going to allow you to clamp things to the machine table in a manner a little bit similar to step clamps. But the difference between step clamps and toe clamps is that it leaves the entire surface available, so you can, let's say, do a facing operation over the entire surface. They allow you to clamp really quite large items on the machine table, small items. If you use a setup block or something like that, you can clamp something a lot thinner. So these here are really, really handy. Here's a video I shot a long time ago showing these toe clamps in action in what has to be my sketchiest clamping setup I've ever done. I got here the Proxxon parallels, I got a V-block, I got toe clamps, and it's machining no fewer than 8 pieces of stainless steel, 8 stainless parts all at one shot, and hey, it worked. Huh, interesting. These toe clamps, I cannot recommend them enough. Tico brand. They also come with these aluminum soft faces. Haven't had a chance to use them yet, but nice to have that available. These are not Proxxon vices. These are vices from eBay, from India on eBay. Proxxon vices, I did have a model some time ago, and on the label it said India. And current vices on Proxxon's website, they look an awful lot like vices that you can get from India for a lot cheaper nowadays, and they look very, very similar. I think the main advantage of going for Proxxon is you're guaranteed to get the bolt pattern to match up with the slots on the table. These ones here I took a chance on, and it did pay off. These slots actually do line up just perfectly with the T-slots on the table. So that was really, really quite handy. I got 2 of these, and that allows you to, let's say, clamp like an extended long chunk of metal and clamp it along the length of the table. It's nice to get vices that have multiple options insofar as how you can mount it on the table. And with these ones here, you can mount it either in that location or you can mount it in that location, and that would be important for getting your part just right under the spindle, because this table does tend to work best when it is racked inwards, and when you rack the table outwards, it becomes a little bit more loosey-goosey. So yeah, nice to have vices with multiple options insofar as how you can mount it. These are pretty good. I think good option for beginner. They're low profile, ready to mount on your table. The only thing here just to note about these ones, they are available on eBay at the moment still, is that these screw slots, they are not for M6 screws, which are standard equipment for Proxxon accessories. They're for M5 screws. That's actually an M6 screw, but I've whittled it down, and I have a video that you can check out on my channel of how I did that, so I can use these vices with M6 screws. Yeah, these vices are not too bad. Made in India once again. Fit and finish, they're not fantastic. Functionally, however, they're absolutely fine. They're square, they're smooth, they're straight. I've tested them out with a test indicator before, and they're just fine. Fit and finish, however, is a little bit scratchy, a little bit loose, but they're perfectly competent vices. Now, while these little vices are fine, my favorite is this model here. This here is a QGG vice out of Taiwan, and its fit and finish, its tolerances are just absolutely fantastic. It even came with this nice little manual and has a inspection document in here telling all the tolerances. It's pretty cool. Now let's turn to the first page. Parts breakdown. Turn to the first page. I'd like to show you this table here. Now, QGG vices, you can get them on the internet all over Amazon, eBay, etc., etc. And very often you'll get a table like this, but I've noticed that very frequently this model right here it seems to no longer be in production. Yeah. Let's draw across to overall length. Notice that this vise here is one of the shortest of the series. These QGG vices, even in the smaller 2-inch variety, they tend to be really elongate, like considerably longer than this. And this one here is already more than enough for this little mill. In fact, I can't really imagine it being much longer than that. Otherwise, it's going to get in the way of the hand wheels, which are just down below like that. Now, other than its really great fit and finish and everything, it really is an ideal vise to go along with this machine. It's sized just right, and it has a whole bunch of other features. Let me go through them. First of all, it has a relatively narrow fixed jaw. And a relatively narrow fixed jaw is important on a small table with limited Y travel. So you don't want to be using up any Y distance by having like a big fat jaw there. So that's pretty handy. Short form factor, like I said. Mounting it onto the table might prove a little bit challenging. You could use step clamps, but step clamps are not optimal. So instead, what I've done is I've manufactured these little hold downs, and I got a total of 4 of them here that can work with some T-nuts, and that makes it really easy to get this vise positioned just exactly where you want it. You can even put it at an angle. You can have it at any, well, you can have it completely horizontal as well. So that's the only problem with these vices, is that you'll have to figure out some sort of way of actually affixing them to the table. Now, another thing to look for in this style of vise is you want to get this ledge going the full length. Very often the ledge, or it's just a little groove that's machined that goes like maybe only about that far or so. If you have the whole edge, it just makes it easier to put it anywhere and to get these little hold downs anywhere you want. Another thing to look for is for a threaded screw hole on the fixed jaw. Now with that, you can make yourself, again, this isn't available as any sort of purchased option. I made this. I have a video. You can check it out. I'm having a little bit difficulty getting this threaded. There we go. And this here is a vice stop, which will allow you to position your part in the jaw in the X direction. This is tightened down at the moment. You can loosen that up and drag it up to this little rod to wherever you'd like it. You can, in this particular design that I made, you can even wrap it around like that and it's out of the way, and you can just like leave it attached permanently to the vise. Yeah, so look for that. You can make one of these, or you can make even a simpler one. You could just a little piece of metal and a couple holes would do. Now, the QGG vices, like I said, they come out of Asia, Taiwan, maybe China. I'm not sure where they're all manufactured. The way to tell them, the way to identify them on Fleabay is look for the handle that uses a hook wrench as opposed to just a simple through hole for a Tommy bar. These Tommy bar type vices, they are all, well, not they're all, but the ones I see on eBay, they tend to all be out of India. This size, this style of vice is available from India. Yeah, you can get it there. However, it does have the Tommy bar knob. I think is a little bit longer too. It doesn't have an Acme lead screw. Instead, it just has a threaded screw. Acme screws are nice because they work much more quickly. It's much quicker to open and close and adjust the mobile jaw. So Acme threads on the proper QGG vise. Hook wrenches are actually kind of nice because you can get them at different angles as opposed to a Tommy bar, which just is two different positions, I guess. Also, the Indian vices, they don't have the threaded hole on the fixed jaw, and these are hardened steel, so actually drilling and threading your own hole, that might prove a little bit challenging. Anyways, QGG 60, a beautiful vice. If you can get it, it ain't easy. As the time of recording this video, however, I do see one on eBay. It's not listed as QGG. It's listed somewhere in some other means. I don't know where it is. You'll have to find it on your own if you'd like to get this one. Otherwise, best of luck finding a good vice for this mill. Here's the Universal Teal Apparat UT250 made in India. This is a rather weighty box because it has inside it Proxxon's rotary table for this mill, or as they call it, the universal dividing attachment. It does not come with this 4-jaw lathe chuck. I got that one separately, but it nicely fits in the box. What it does come with is some T-nuts, some hardware to mount it onto the table, as well as that little set of step clamps that I showed you a bit earlier. Anyways, give me a moment. I'm going to reset the camera. I'll put this up on the machine table so we can see how it would be used. So Proxxon wants a literal arm and a leg to buy this thing. Whether it's going to be worth it is, I guess you're just going to have to decide that for yourself. Compared to rotary tables available on eBay from India, which I'm sure are made in equivalent shops, maybe even the same shop. It's a 4-inch table, by the way. Yeah, you can get them cheaper from India, but this one here, I've not seen this exact one on eBay. This must be tailored for Proxxon to use with this machine. For instance, the bolt pattern that you can see right there, that matches up with the T-slots. There's another pair of bolts right there, and we can mount this sideways on the table like so. Proxxon, they don't offer any sort of a tailstock, however, so you only get that. So anyways, that's one of the big things, I guess, for this Proxxon varieties that Mill it's ready to go with this table. But another thing is this adapter here, and the bolt pattern matches up with Proxxon's lathe accessories. Where all the Indian ones, they attach the table in some other means, and, well, yeah, you wouldn't be able to get that sort of compatibility. So here we have a 4-inch table with a couple T-slots. Those T-slots, by the way, they are similar to these ones, but they're not perfect. They're a little bit more shallow. You can put on a 4-jaw chuck. You can put on a 3-jaw chuck. I don't have a 3-jaw chuck. It doesn't come with this 4-jaw one, once again. You can put on an ER20 collet here. You could, I'm not sure what other accessories Proxxon has. A couple other lathe accessories might work with this. Otherwise, fit and finish is, well, it's not fantastic. It's kind of crooked there. Paint job is flecking and not great, but it's quite functional, really. And if what you would like to do is machine along an arc, this here is the only option that you're going to have available. And you got the scale there, and you got a little oil port, and this here is for fixing the table once you get it to where you want it. Interestingly, in the box of accessories are all sorts of screws for mounting it onto the table and hex keys and stuff, but there's no wrench for this little locking. It's not a big deal, but it's kind of funny that they didn't see that they oversight. They didn't see that. Otherwise, if you're only interested in dividing apart rather than machining along a radius, Proxxon, in my opinion, they have a better option. Look at that one next. The T-Laprat TA250, not the UT250, but the TA250, Article 24044. No longer available on Proxxon's website. However, it is available. I've seen it on a few online retailers, and I quite like this accessory. No indication as to where it is made. I suspect it is actually made in Germany because it comes with a German hex key here, and it's machined out of aluminum rather than steel, and the machining is really first rate. Once again, this here is usable with the lathe system, and you can see some grooves here that allow it to be mounted onto the lathe machine bed. However, it can be mounted onto this table as well with a few through holes like that. It could be mounted sideways using those 2 holes like so. Once again, no tailstock, however. Comes with some accessories, some bolts and some square nuts that'll fit into there. Not quite as nice as T-nuts, but they're perfectly functional. Now, unlike the rotary table, there is no hand jogging wheel to actually make an arc, to mill an arc. However, this is really intuitive to use, and it's really quick to use. The way you do it is, you see a little needle in there that engages with the sprocket on the screw. You can pull that out and then rotate the head, and you can actually, if you just pull it out a little bit, you can count the number of clicks that you are rotating, which is much quicker and more intuitive than using the hand jog and keeping track of the degrees there and the degrees on the handle as well. It comes with a 48 tooth wheel, a 40 tooth wheel, and this is going to allow all sorts of different possible divisions. 48, that'll give you 24 and 16 and 12 and so on and so forth. This here will give you 20 and 10 and 8 and 5 and a few others. So anyways, I really like this because it is intuitive and quick to operate if you simply need to be indexing. Take, for example, this here over-engineered, I suppose, SIG strainer. I wasn't straining quite as quickly as I would have liked, so I added a number of holes to it, and this divider made that operation just like so quick and easy, and just an absolutely professional result. It looks like it's from the factory like this. Now, some other accessories that you might want to get if you have the rotary table or that dividing attachment are some other things that go along with the lathe system, like a 4-jaw chuck. And this 4-jaw chuck I find quite useful because with the rotary table, it would allow you to mount a part, and center it relatively easily. You just saw that in the previous little video machining that sink strainer. And here's an ER20 adapter. And this ER20 adapter would be very handy for, well, for easily centering a relatively small shaft. That's this, must it go up to, I think, 10 millimeters? Yeah, 10 millimeters. Anyways, it comes also with the wrenches. That's kind of handy. If you'd like to use odd-sized cutting tools with this machine, you need a drill chuck, and this is the one. This here I have is labeled Proxxon. The one that's shown on their catalog says Rome, and I have no doubt that this is actually made in Germany, a Rome chuck. It says B12. B12 is the taper to which this shaft has been, this adapting shaft has been press fit. This here would be a straight 10 millimeter, and that will allow it to be used with a 10 millimeter collet. Now let's test the accuracy, the runout of this chuck. I have here a 10 millimeter rod. It is 10 centimeters in length, and we can see here that it is completely straight. So anyways, I'm going to set this up and get us rolling again. Measuring at about 65 millimeters of extension, 10 millimeter ground rod. Yikes, yeah, the runout is huge. It's not the chuck though, that would be the collet, Proxxon's lame collet system for this mill. You can check out, I think it's in video number 2, episode 2. I discussed that. Now for completeness here, I have a 4 millimeter end mill chucked in, and I'm measuring concentricity runout just a little bit below the jaws, and what we will find is that runout is still terrible. Yeah, I've found with this machine, with this drill chuck, you cannot hope for your drill to go where you actually want it to go. It ain't going to happen. Even when you mount a drill bit directly in a collet, it still is going to go off and do its own thing. So what I do is I always start holes with a end mill, and with that it's possible to get pretty good results, because even though there's a little bit of runout because of the collet, the end mill is still wobbling around concentric with the spindle, so it still does get the hole where you want it to go. And you can check out how I did that in this video where I made this vise stop, and I was pretty happy with that. I did eventually get holes where I wanted them to be, quite nice and precisely. Here's an inexpensive fly cutter, Chinese. You can find them all over eBay. 10 millimeter shank to fit into this collet. High-speed steel bit. Cuts a swathe of, I'd say, about 33, maybe 34 millimeters in diameter at maximum. Now, I have here an aluminium block clamped down with some toe clamps, and it's about 29 millimeters across, so it is pushing this this fly cutter to its maximum. Let's give it a shot. That's the RPM set to about 800. Touch it off. Okay. One pass. And I'll chase it just to smooth it out. And there we go. Now let's remove the part and examine the finish. Not too bad, not too great. Maybe I just need to get the feeds and speeds adjusted, dialed in just right. Feels a little bit rough to the thumbnail, but it's okay. Now, I don't use this fly cutter all that often because Well, this Proxxon machine is really difficult to properly tram the spindle relative to the table. It nods a little bit and there's no real adjustment for that. You can adjust the left-right angle, however there's no fine adjustment, so getting it square is it's virtually impossible. And if the spindle is not square, what's going to happen is, well, your part is not going to get fly cut, well, perpendicular, parallel to the table. Look at this. After about 29 millimeters out, it's almost a 0.15 of a millimeter different in height. Yeah, that's terrible. Anyways, if you use a fly cutter with the Proxxon FF230 Mill and you have some technique that you're able to make it work, please do let us know in the comments. Now here's a slitting saw from Flea Bay with 10 millimeter shank, straight shank once again. Number of spacers here and then nut to tighten the saw down. These use saws that are blades which are 63 by 16, is that there? Yeah, and this one here is a 0.5 millimeter thickness. I have a small handful of these that I've purchased on eBay. Relatively inexpensive, half a millimeter, I think a millimeter and a half, something like that. Anyways, a slitting saw, these are really handy. You can use these for doing, well, some machining operations which are very common, like making a slit or a groove. For example, here is a video I made some time ago of making a slit into that QGG vice stop that I showed you a little bit earlier. Anyways, slitting saw, very handy. Here's the Starrett number 827 MB edge and center hole center finder. The MA model, if you do see that, that only has the edge finder and it doesn't have this other end. This other end is quite handy. This is a 10 millimeter shank, fits nicely into the mill collet. And let me splice in a video showing the edge finder in operation, how you use it. An edge finder is this tool that has this eccentric, spring-loaded eccentric at the working tip. Let's see how this works. You turn the mill on at the lowest speed and you can see that eccentric tip is wobbling around like that. Now on the y-axis that we're going to zero the y-axis with the fixed jaw of the vise, which is effectively that side of the workpiece. And we're going to get this zero properly right there. That's good. And I'm going to pull the y-axis outwards until that eccentric starts, the center finder starts touching the fixed jaw. And you can see that the eccentricity is decreased and it looks like it's almost perfectly now running true. However, where you find the edges, you keep pulling it out until right there it kicks out. Now we can turn that off, and what that means is that we found the edge of this, well, not really the edge of it, the spindle is 3 millimeters away from this edge because the thickness of this tip is the diameter 6 millimeters, 3 millimeter radius. And here's how you find the center of a hole. First of all, I got it loaded up and I'm going to center it more or less over the hole and drop it in. And what you'll notice is that it is spring-loaded. The tip's spring-loaded. As I drop it in, it is going off of center. Okay, that's dropped in all the way. And you can feel, you can see with your own eyes, or you can feel with your fingers that this is not centered. And unlike the edge finder, you do not turn the machine on when you're doing this. What you gotta do is just by feel, it is possible, a little bit of finagling, yeah, that's about right there. With a little bit of finagling, it gets to the point where you can't feel in any direction any sort of edge. So that's showing that this loose center point is now centered on the spindle. Very often it is useful to stick a test indicator into the spindle. You can tram a vise, you can check your part, check flatness, something like that. We just looked at that a moment ago. Now, in order to do this, you need an adapter, and there is no 10 millimeter adapter that I am aware of. However, there are a number of adapters that are in Imperial. This here is 5/16 of an inch, and that is very close to 8 millimeters. So that'll work with one of the collets that is available for this machine. This one here is a real simple one, really short, and just that little post impinges on the dovetail. Here's a little bit more of a sophisticated one, and this one here is a swivel, which allows an extra degree of freedom for moving where exactly you're putting the test indicator. But to be honest, this one here on the left is usually the one I reach for, because this machine is so tiny, the working space is so small. This really compact version it suits 95% of my purposes. And here are two wing screws from Flea Bay. One is 20 millimeters in length, the other is 16 millimeters in length. They're currently available. You can find them on Flea Bay, no problem. They are really quite nicely made. It looks like plastic, but that's actually aluminum. Here's the 20 millimeter one, here's the 16 millimeter one, and they are way nicer, way more preferable to using the cap screws and having to fiddle and find where to stick the hex key in. These ones here are always available for locking the axes down, and very nicely they are spring loaded, so if you need to adjust the rotational position, you could just pull it out and find a new location for it, and you can drop it back in like that, and away you go. Really handy accessory. Highly recommend this as an upgrade to your machine. I hope you found this survey of accessories for the Proxxon FF230 Teeny Tiny Mill to be useful. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.